The holidays had always been the most magical time of the year in our quiet suburban neighborhood. Every December, the streets would glow with strings of twinkling lights, inflatable Santas, and elaborate nativity scenes. It was a tradition, one that had lasted for decades, and my family had always taken pride in joining the festivities with enthusiasm. But that year, something shifted. That year, the lights I carefully hung along my roofline, wrapped around every tree, and lined my driveway became a flashpoint in the war that no one saw coming. It started innocuously enough. I had spent weeks meticulously planning my Christmas display. I wanted it to be grand, to capture the attention and awe of everyone driving by. There were synchronized lights that danced across the roof, moving patterns that flickered like waves, and thousands of bulbs that I had carefully color-coded to create a visual spectacle. I had even started experimenting with music, playing gentle holiday classics in sync with the lights. The result was a display that neighbors often stopped to admire on their evening walks. Families would pause their cars, phones in hand, capturing moments of holiday magic. Everything seemed perfect until Karen moved in across the street. Karen was a name that came with a reputation in our HOA circles, though I didn't know her personally yet. She had a presence that seemed to demand order, control, and above all, conformity. No sooner had she moved into her pristine, beige-colored house than she began scanning the neighborhood for anything that deviated from her idea of perfection. Our street, once a cozy mix of colors, decorations, and personality, suddenly became a battleground. On a chilly December morning, I received the first note. It was neatly typed, folded, and slipped under my door. "Dear homeowner," it read, "while we appreciate the holiday spirit, the lights on your property are excessive and disruptive. Please ensure that all decorations are peaceful, HOA approved, and do not disturb your neighbors." The words seemed polite, almost cordial, but there was a sharp edge that cut through any sense of friendliness. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. My initial reaction was a mixture of disbelief and irritation. I had lived in this neighborhood for over a decade, and my displays had always been cheerful, never disturbing. But Karen's arrival had shifted the tone. Her complaint wasn't about safety, noise, or property damage. It was about control, about asserting her idea of what the neighborhood should look like. Over the next few days, she escalated. There were more notes, each one more passive-aggressive than the last, filled with references to HOA rules, neighborhood standards, and the comfort of all residents. One morning, I found a flyer attached to my mailbox, warning me that continued non-compliance could result in fines. She had taken her crusade public, and suddenly, my festive enthusiasm felt like a rebellion. At first, I tried to comply. I toned down some of the more extravagant elements, dimmed the brighter lights, and even removed a few of the moving patterns. But the more I complied, the more insistent Karen became. It was as though she viewed restraint as weakness. Every day brought a new critique, a new threat, a new demand to make my decorations conform to a bland, uniform standard. The joy I had once felt in decorating my home began to fade, replaced with a growing sense of frustration. I realized that this wasn't just about Christmas lights anymore. This was about standing up to someone who sought to dictate what happiness could look like on my property. That's when the idea first struck me, almost like a flash of inspiration in the middle of my annoyance. If Karen wanted me to conform, to play by her rules, why not take the opposite approach? Why not embrace everything she hated, everything she found disturbing, and push it to an extreme? The thought simmered for days, growing bolder with each passing note from her. I began researching professional light shows, studying the kinds that used thousands of bulbs and intricate patterns, synced perfectly to music. But I didn't want gentle holiday music. No, the soundtrack of rebellion had to be louder, wilder, impossible to ignore. By mid-December, my plan was taking shape. I began acquiring the equipment I would need: advanced light controllers, hundreds of new bulbs, powerful amplifiers, and a library of music that ranged from classical chaos to heavy metal thunder. The idea wasn't just to decorate. It was to make a statement. A statement that Christmas joy could coexist with defiance, that holiday lights didn't have to be silent, and that no single neighbor could dictate how the season should be celebrated. Word began to spread quietly among the other neighbors. Some were curious, others nervous. Karen, of course, was oblivious to the full scope of my plan at first. She continued her complaints, insisting that I follow the HOA guidelines, but I no longer read them as warnings. I read them as provocations. Every note she left became fuel for my creativity, a reminder that compliance was no longer an option. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, I threw myself into preparation. I mapped every inch of my property, creating a blueprint for light placement that would maximize visibility and impact. I experimented with timing, ensuring that bulbs would flash, rotate, and shimmer in sync with my carefully selected music. The playlist itself was unconventional, a chaotic mix of heavy guitar riffs, pounding drums, and operatic metal vocals. It wasn't traditional. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't designed to please Karen. And that was exactly the point. The excitement built gradually, almost like an electrical current humming through the neighborhood. Neighbors began to peek from their windows, sensing that something different was coming. Some whispered that they'd never seen a display like this before. Others worried about the noise, but I knew that the spectacle would transcend annoyance. It would become an experience. By the time I finished setting up the final strands of lights and tested the sound system at full volume, the house had transformed into a radiant, pulsing beacon. Every tree, every roofline, every pathway radiated color and movement, synchronized to music that commanded attention. But there was one final step, one final touch that would elevate this from a simple rebellion to an unforgettable spectacle. I began posting hints online, in local community groups and social media pages, teasing a holiday light show unlike anything before. I didn't reveal the music, the scale, or the intensity. I let curiosity grow, letting whispers travel from driveway to driveway. The anticipation became palpable. People were beginning to wonder what I was planning, and unknowingly, they were helping me spread the legend before it even began. And then it happened. On a crisp December evening, the first synchronized display lit up my property. The lights danced to the first track, a heavy metal rendition of a Christmas classic, and the reaction was immediate. Passers-by stopped, mesmerized by the movement and energy. The sound system rumbled with the bass, shaking windows and rattling cars. The show was intense, overwhelming, and utterly mesmerizing, a bold challenge to the muted conformity Karen had demanded. From my vantage point inside the house, I watched shadows move across the street. Some neighbors covered their ears, some cheered quietly, but all of them were watching. And then, inevitably, the first sign of the storm arrived. A single, crisp knock at the door. A note left in the mailbox. Karen had seen it. Karen had heard it, and she was not happy. The war had officially begun. I began to notice subtle changes in the neighborhood's behavior. Even those who had been indifferent or skeptical now stopped to watch. A few residents started waving in solidarity, while others secretly recorded the show for later. The streets echoed with the hum of excited conversation and the occasional cheer from someone witnessing the display for the first time. My property had become the epicenter of a social event, and I began to relish the energy it generated. It wasn't just about rebellion anymore. It was about celebration, community, and a shared thrill of witnessing something extraordinary. Karen, predictably, could not tolerate the popularity. She attempted to create roadblocks by writing letters to the city, insisting that the noise violated ordinances and demanding that the HOA step in to stop me. She even tried to rally other neighbors to her cause, emphasizing rules, regulations, and the supposed sanctity of peaceful enjoyment. But by this time, her efforts were met with resistance. People had chosen sides. Many had already experienced the joy and excitement the display brought, and they were not willing to let a single neighbor suppress it. The division in the neighborhood grew obvious. One side rigid, fearful, and authoritarian. The other vibrant, joyous, and unapologetically rebellious. As the days passed, I realized that I had to up the ante. A display of this magnitude demanded a climax, something that would cement the show in local legend. I began experimenting with sequences that combined every element of chaos I had learned. Lights that simulated explosions, patterns that shifted in unpredictable waves, and music that moved from classical carols to the most intense, adrenaline-pumping metal riffs. Every evening became a rehearsal. Every sequence a performance designed to dazzle and provoke. The display became almost hypnotic, a carefully orchestrated storm of color and sound. Word of the display reached beyond the neighborhood. Social media platforms began tagging the videos as must-see, and local content creators began posting reactions. Soon, the traffic around my street became noticeable. Cars parked for blocks, strangers wandered down driveways, and a sense of spectacle replaced the ordinary hum of suburban life. The display had grown beyond my initial intentions. It was no longer just a protest against Karen's demands. It was an event, a performance, a phenomenon. But as the show grew, so did the tension. Karen, now fully aware of the public attention, became more aggressive. Notes turned into confrontations. Emails turned into threats of legal action. She even attempted to block driveways and demand police involvement, citing disturbance and harassment. But by now, my counter-strategy was clear. Every attempt to suppress the display only made it more famous. Each note, each complaint, each demand fueled my creativity, and the anticipation for the next night's show reached fever pitch. The stage was set. Spectators lined the street. Phones recorded every frame. The HOA was paralyzed between enforcing rules and facing a community that had chosen excitement over compliance. And Karen, blinded by fury and determination, was preparing for what she imagined would be a final victory. But she had miscalculated. She had underestimated how far I was willing to go, how much I had prepared, and how much the community had rallied to witness what was quickly becoming a legendary spectacle. As the sun dipped below the horizon on another December evening, the first chords of the night's performance began to pulse through the speakers. Shadows moved across the street. Phones rose. The crowd hushed in anticipation. And somewhere across the way, Karen watched with clenched fists, bracing for the chaos that was about to unfold. The lights flickered, the music roared, and the battle of wills reached a deafening crescendo. I, in turn, embraced the escalation. I added new sequences each night, introducing light patterns that seemed to defy logic, synced to music that was heavier, louder, and more intense than the night before. I experimented with strobes, flashing sequences that created the illusion of movement across the yard. Each new iteration was designed to astonish, entertain, and provoke. The display became a living performance, a kinetic sculpture of lights, sound, and sheer audacity. People began to document the display from multiple angles, capturing drone footage, long-exposure photography, and slow-motion videos that showcased the intricacy of the patterns. The reactions online were astounding. Comments ranged from sheer admiration to disbelief that something like this could exist in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Videos were shared, reshared, and reposted, each iteration gaining more traction. My street, once quiet and uneventful, had become an online landmark, a symbol of rebellion, creativity, and unapologetic holiday fun. Karen's responses became increasingly desperate. She attempted to block driveways, cited supposed decibel violations, and tried to bring in local officials to shut the display down. But by this point, public attention made her actions untenable. Every complaint she filed became fodder for social media, turning her fury into entertainment for spectators. She was losing control, and she knew it. The neighborhood, and now the internet, was firmly on my side. As Christmas drew closer, the anticipation for the climactic performance grew. I planned to unveil the ultimate sequence on Christmas Eve, a synchronized finale that combined every element of the display: lights, music, intensity, into a single, unforgettable spectacle. Word had spread online that the finale would be unlike anything ever seen, and spectators began arriving in record numbers, eager to witness the culmination of this month-long battle of wills. And yet, as the night of the finale approached, Karen remained vigilant. Her eyes followed my every move, her fists clenched in fury. She had underestimated the spectacle, underestimated the power of viral attention, and underestimated the lengths I was willing to go to celebrate the holiday my way. The tension was electric. The neighborhood waited with bated breath. And somewhere across the street, Karen prepared for what she imagined would be her final victory. A victory that, unbeknownst to her, was slipping further from her grasp with every flashing light, every pounding beat, and every cheer from the growing crowd. The stage was set. The lights were ready. The music was cued. And the world was about to witness a Christmas display unlike anything it had ever seen. One that would leave Karen reeling and the neighborhood buzzing for years to come. Christmas Eve arrived with a tension that seemed almost tangible. The neighborhood had transformed into a stage set for an epic spectacle. Streets that were usually quiet and orderly were now lined with cars, tripods, and excited spectators. People who had only known this suburban block as a place of beige homes and trimmed lawns had come to expect something extraordinary, something unforgettable. Cameras were raised, phones were out, and drones hovered above the crowd, capturing every angle of what had become the most anticipated event of the season. Inside my house, the final sequences were loaded, lights synchronized to the most intense heavy metal tracks I could assemble. Thousands of bulbs had been arranged to create waves of color, flashes of light, and intricate patterns that would dance across the property in perfect harmony with the music. The sound system had been calibrated to a level that was both powerful and precise. Every bass drop, every guitar riff, every thunderous drum beat would resonate through the neighborhood, turning the street into a live concert venue. Outside, Karen watched from her porch, her arms folded tightly, jaw clenched, and eyes fixed on my house. She had spent the past few weeks preparing herself for what she imagined would be a display of chaos she could report, regulate, and ultimately shut down. She had plotted every complaint, drafted every letter, and even considered calling the authorities preemptively. But no amount of preparation could have readied her for what was about to happen. As the first notes of the opening track hit the speakers, the crowd collectively gasped. The lights erupted in a frenzy of color and motion. Rooflines flashed like neon waves, trees shimmered with moving patterns that twisted and spiraled, and thousands of bulbs blinked in time with the relentless rhythm of the music. The sequence was violent in its intensity, yet beautiful in its choreography, a perfect storm of artistry and audacity. People were captivated, unable to look away. Phones recorded every frame. Drones captured the spectacle from above, revealing a pulsating sea of light and sound that seemed to transcend the boundaries of the suburban street. Karen's reaction was immediate. Her scowl deepened, her hands clenched tighter, and she stormed onto the sidewalk, waving her arms as if to signal the universe to stop what was happening. Her frustration was palpable, radiating outward like static energy. She shouted, although no one could hear her over the music, and her every movement became a caricature of resistance. Spectators nearby smirked or whispered among themselves, delighting in the contrast between her rage and the audience's awe. The show intensified with each passing minute. Light sequences shifted unpredictably, pulsing and spiraling in patterns that seemed almost alive. Music roared, thundering through the neighborhood, creating vibrations that rattled windows and filled the air with electricity. The crowd was mesmerized, some cheering, some in stunned silence, others dancing in the snow, completely caught up in the energy. Social media feeds exploded with live videos and reactions. Clips were shared hundreds of times in minutes, and by the end of the first hour, the display had already achieved viral status. Karen's fury continued to mount. She paced her porch, took frantic videos, and tried to find some fault that could be reported to the HOA, the city, or the police. She shouted at the passing cars, gesturing wildly, but her voice was drowned out by the synchronized chaos that dominated the street. Every attempt she made to regain control was futile. The public had already chosen its side. Spectators applauded and cheered, reinforcing the spectacle with their presence and energy. She had inadvertently fueled the very phenomenon she sought to extinguish. Meanwhile, the performance reached its peak. A massive final sequence was unveiled, combining every element of lights, sound, and movement into a single, breathtaking crescendo. Patterns collided across the property, bulbs flickered in impossible sequences, and the music intensified with layers of heavy guitars, rapid-fire drums, and haunting vocals that resonated through the night. The synchronized display created an immersive experience that felt almost otherworldly. People were captivated, phones held high, eyes wide in amazement, faces lit by the brilliant glow of thousands of lights. At the height of the show, a small crowd of neighbors who had been hesitant at first began cheering louder than anyone could have anticipated. The energy was contagious, spreading through the spectators like wildfire. Even those who had been skeptical earlier were caught up in the spectacle. The block had transformed into a living, breathing entity, pulsing with light, sound, and excitement. Karen, however, reached the breaking point. She attempted to confront me directly, stepping toward the street in a futile bid to demand compliance. But the audience's presence created a buffer. Cameras rolled, phones recorded, and drones hovered. Every movement she made was captured for posterity, amplifying her anger and frustration for a growing online audience. Her protests were drowned out by cheers, laughter, and the pounding music. She had become the villain in a story that she no longer controlled. The final moments of the show were cinematic. Lights cascaded in sweeping arcs. Massive sequences of synchronized bulbs flickered across the yard, and the music reached a climax that was both violent and beautiful. Snowflakes fell gently from the sky, reflecting the vibrant patterns and turning the street into a scene reminiscent of a movie set. Spectators clapped, cheered, and hugged, witnessing something that was both rebellious and magical. The performance was complete, a testament to creativity, defiance, and the holiday spirit amplified to its most extreme form. As the last notes faded and the final lights dimmed, a stunned silence settled over the crowd. Phones were lowered slowly, cameras shut off, and people exchanged wide-eyed glances. The neighborhood had witnessed a display unlike any other. It had been loud, chaotic, and unapologetic. It had drawn thousands of spectators, gone viral online, and become the defining story of the season. And somewhere across the street, Karen stood frozen, realizing that her attempts to control the narrative had not only failed, they had backfired spectacularly. The crowd slowly dispersed, buzzing with conversation, laughter, and disbelief. People returned to their homes, already sharing videos and stories online. Cars crept back down the street, leaving empty parking spaces and an echo of what had just transpired. And my house, once just another home on a quiet street, now stood as a monument to rebellion, creativity, and the most extreme Christmas display the neighborhood had ever seen. The battle had reached its climax, but the story was far from over. Karen's fury had not abated, the spectacle had not faded, and the aftermath of the most viral holiday display in suburban history was only beginning to unfold. The morning after the Christmas Eve spectacle, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. Cars that had lined the street for hours the night before were gone, but the energy lingered like electricity in the air. People walked past my house in disbelief, pausing to take in what remained. The faint glow of carefully strung bulbs, faint traces of snow reflecting residual light, and the quiet hum of the sound system powering down after the climactic performance. Social media had exploded overnight. Clips of the display had gone viral, accumulating hundreds of thousands of views, likes, and shares in less than 24 hours. The light show had not only captured the attention of the neighborhood, but had become a nationwide sensation. News outlets picked up the story. Local reporters broadcast segments highlighting the intensity of the display, interviewing astonished spectators, and even featuring reactions from people who had watched the videos online from distant cities. The display had become more than just a fight with Karen. It had become a symbol of audacity, creativity, and the power of community spectacle. Even YouTube channels dedicated to viral HOA drama began featuring the story, dissecting every sequence of lights and sound, praising the synchronization, and emphasizing the sheer scale of the production. My suburban home, once ordinary, was now a viral landmark. The neighborhood itself had split definitively. On one side were those who had embraced the display, reveling in the excitement and online attention. Children ran up and down the sidewalks, inspired by the lights and music. Adults shared footage on social media, laughing and marveling at the audacity of it all. The other side, led by Karen, remained furious, though increasingly isolated. She continued filing complaints, though their impact was now minimal. The public had rallied, drawn to the spectacle, and her complaints had become almost comical in comparison to the viral frenzy. Every post she made online criticizing the display was met with likes, comments, and shares, ironically increasing the fame of the very thing she sought to suppress. Karen's tactics became more desperate as the week wore on. She attempted to contact the city for a formal intervention, insisting that noise ordinances and HOA rules had been flagrantly violated. She even tried to enlist other neighbors to join her in a coordinated effort to limit future displays. But her efforts were thwarted by two powerful forces: the spectacle's immense popularity and my careful compliance with technical loopholes. Every attempt she made to enforce control only served to heighten the public narrative of rebellion and ingenuity. Spectators and online viewers alike celebrated the audacity, sharing footage, tagging friends, and laughing at the seemingly endless struggle between one frustrated neighbor and the unstoppable force of viral creativity. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to flock to my house. Visitors from neighboring towns arrived in small groups, eager to witness what had become a legendary holiday attraction. Some came out of curiosity, some for the thrill, and others to be part of the viral sensation that had transformed a quiet suburban street into a buzzing hub of spectacle. Word of mouth continued to amplify the story, and social media platforms were flooded with clips and commentary. My display had become a cultural phenomenon, and every mention, share, or comment added to its growing fame. Karen's reactions were increasingly erratic. She was seen pacing her yard, muttering to herself, and making frantic phone calls to the HOA, city officials, and anyone she could convince to intervene. Her anger was no longer just about aesthetics or regulations. It had become personal. Her desire for control, her obsession with conformity, and her frustration at the public's fascination with my display all collided in a visible meltdown. Social media users began sharing videos of her pacing, her gestures, and her complaints, further fueling the narrative of Karen versus the unstoppable holiday spectacle. She had become the antagonist in a story that the public could not resist. By midweek, the display had settled into a quieter rhythm. The lights were dimmed during the day, but remained synchronized for brief evening shows, enough to keep the neighborhood intrigued. Online attention remained high, with clips continuing to circulate and reactions pouring in from across the country. The story became a case study in viral HOA drama. One neighbor's desire to control contrasted against another's determination to create, entertain, and defy expectations. It was a tale of rebellion, spectacle, and community engagement that transcended the suburban setting. I began receiving messages from people offering congratulations, asking for behind-the-scenes details, and sharing their own experiences of neighborhood conflicts. Some were inspired to start their own light shows. Others wanted to witness the spectacle in person. The display had become more than a personal project. It was now a source of joy, inspiration, and even humor for thousands of people online. Every comment, like, and share reinforced a victory, not just over Karen, but over the idea that conformity could dictate creativity. Karen, however, remained stubbornly combative. She continued documenting, recording, and filing complaints, each action growing more desperate and more public. Her social media posts, once private gripes, had become fodder for viral amusement. People began creating compilations of her reactions, editing them alongside the light show footage, and sharing them widely. Karen, unknowingly, had become a secondary star of the viral story. The frustrated, defeated antagonist whose obsession only amplified the spectacle. By the end of the week, the neighborhood had settled into a new normal. My display continued in a refined, highly polished form. Light sequences were upgraded, music playlists expanded, and the audience continued to grow. Spectators came not only to watch, but to celebrate the audacity, energy, and creativity that had turned a routine suburban street into a viral attraction. The display had evolved beyond a personal rebellion. It had become a community event, an online sensation, and a story that would be remembered for years. Karen's defeat, though personal, had become symbolic. Her attempts to impose control, her obsession with conformity, and her inability to accept joy and creativity had been rendered almost meaningless in the face of public fascination. The neighborhood had chosen spectacle, audacity, and celebration over restriction, and the narrative was clear. Creativity had triumphed over rigidity. Community fascination had outpaced personal frustration, and the Christmas Eve display had become a legend in its own right. And so, as the week drew to a close, the neighborhood buzzed with energy, online reactions continued to pour in, and my home stood as a monument to rebellion, ingenuity, and the viral power of a carefully crafted light show. Karen, meanwhile, remained on the porch across the street, fuming, muttering, and realizing that she had underestimated both the spectacle and its impact. The story had reached its viral peak, but there was still one final chapter to unfold, one final twist that would cement this event in the history of suburban drama. The night before Christmas, the neighborhood was alive with anticipation once again. Though the viral frenzy had already peaked online, the final display was planned as a culmination, a grand finale designed to leave a lasting impression. Word had spread that this would be the most elaborate sequence yet, drawing spectators from every corner of the town and beyond. News crews returned, local influencers set up cameras, and social media feeds were flooded with reminders. Don't miss the ultimate Christmas light show. My property, already transformed into a spectacle of color, sound, and motion, now seemed larger than life under the glow of the crisp winter sky. Inside, the preparations were meticulous. Every bulb, every light sequence, every sound effect had been synchronized to perfection. The playlist was a dramatic blend of heavy metal, orchestral power, and holiday classics reimagined with thunderous intensity. This wasn't just a light show. It was an immersive experience, a performance that demanded attention and rewarded curiosity. From a subtle flicker of a single bulb to the explosive crescendo of lights and music, every element was engineered to astonish and enthrall. Outside, the street had transformed into a carnival of anticipation. Cars lined every curb, cameras and tripods captured every angle, and a throng of spectators waited with rapt attention. Families bundled in coats and scarves, holding hot chocolate and cameras, whispered in excitement as the lights began to flicker. Children pressed against car windows, faces illuminated by bursts of color, while adults exchanged awed glances, knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and jaw tight. Her posture radiated fury, determination, and disbelief. She had witnessed the previous nights, seen the viral attention, and still clung to the belief that her complaints, her warnings, her insistence on conformity could somehow prevail. But tonight, she was about to realize the full magnitude of what she had inadvertently unleashed. As the first notes rang out, lights erupted across my property with a precision that left the crowd gasping. Roof lines, trees, and pathways pulsed in perfect synchronization with the music. Every beat, every riff, every drum strike was matched by a dazzling display of movement and color. The effect was hypnotic, overwhelming, and exhilarating all at once. Spectators cheered, clapped, and recorded, caught in the magnetic pull of the show. Karen's frustration became almost palpable. She shouted, waved, and gestured, but her voice was drowned out by the sound system and the collective energy of the audience. Drones hovered above, capturing sweeping overhead views that showcased the scale of the spectacle. Social media feeds exploded in real time with live videos, reactions, and commentary. Within hours, the finale sequence was being shared worldwide, turning a suburban Christmas dispute into a viral sensation with international reach. The final sequence was unlike anything the neighborhood or the internet had ever seen. Lights collided in sweeping arcs, creating cascading patterns that seemed to defy logic. Bulbs flashed in impossible formations, synchronized to the most dramatic moments in the music. Heavy metal guitars roared, drums pounded like thunder, and vocals soared over the entire performance, creating an almost cinematic atmosphere. Snowflakes reflected the colored lights, giving the street a surreal, dreamlike quality. Spectators were mesmerized, their faces lit with awe, delight, and wonder. Karen, finally realizing that her control had been completely undermined, could only stand frozen in disbelief. Every complaint, every letter, every attempt to limit or suppress the display had not only failed, but had fueled the spectacle, turning her into an unwitting villain of the story. Neighbors laughed quietly among themselves, sharing knowing glances. Online, viewers mocked, praised, and celebrated the audacity of the show. Karen had become a viral character herself, her anger now a source of amusement and fascination. The crescendo approached. Lights intensified, music roared louder, and every sequence reached a peak of synchronized chaos and beauty. The crowd cheered, some dancing, some clapping, some simply standing in stunned awe. Cameras captured every moment, ensuring that the finale would be remembered long after the night ended. It was a moment of pure triumph, not just for the spectacle, but for creativity, rebellion, and the joy of celebrating the holidays on one's own terms. As the final notes faded, a collective cheer erupted. Lights dimmed gradually, leaving a gentle glow across the yard. Spectators lingered, sharing videos, discussing the sequences, and reliving the intense experience. The display had achieved everything I had envisioned: viral fame, neighborhood admiration, and a definitive victory over the rigidity that Karen had represented. Karen, defeated and exhausted, retreated to her porch. She realized, too late, that she had underestimated both the spectacle and the power of community fascination. Her efforts to suppress joy and creativity had only amplified them, turning a simple dispute into a legendary event. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had chosen celebration over conformity, audacity over obedience, and shared laughter and awe over conflict. In the days that followed, the story continued to grow online. Clips from the finale circulated widely, news outlets featured segments, and social media buzzed with commentary. The display became a case study in viral HOA drama, a story of defiance, creativity, and community engagement that transcended the suburban setting. And while Karen remained a fixture across the street, her frustration was no longer capable of overshadowing the phenomenon that had emerged. My home, once just another house in a quiet neighborhood, had become a symbol of creativity that refused to be constrained, of joy that could not be silenced, and of the viral power of one person daring to defy a rigid authority. The Christmas lights, once a source of conflict, had evolved into a shared experience of wonder, excitement, and celebration that would be remembered for years. In the end, the story was simple yet profound. When one neighbor demanded control, another responded with creativity and audacity. The result was chaos, viral fame, and a spectacle that brought a community together in ways no rules or regulations could have predicted. And as the snow settled on the quiet suburban street, the lights, now silent, left a lasting impression, not just on the neighborhood, but on everyone who had witnessed the Christmas Eve show that had gone down in viral history.